the Frostspark set. We'll go in the order of the cards that were revealed here. So the first card is Piercing Twilight. There was a lot of talk about this card, how good this card might be. I honestly am not overly sure. You have to look at the 4-drop slot in made in blue to see if this is reasonable. Now, I'll come out and say it, I do actually believe this is pretty reasonable as a creature in the 4-drop slot. Usually the 4-drop slot in blue, when you're playing a creature, you're either playing, I've seen this, you'll play Drez Renegade as your kind of bigger guard creature, which I'm going to say that's suboptimal in my opinion. You'll play Elusive Screamer if you're going for draw. You're trying to draw a bunch of cards, or you're running some effect that revolves around that. Mystic Dragon if you're running well, you'll either run Mystic Dragon or Royal Sage. You don't see decks run both. You'll either run the Mystic Dragon for Prophecy, or you'll run a Royal Sage for the tempo. Different strokes for different folks on that. To be honest, I usually do a 2-2 split where I'll run. Well, it's not exactly effective, but when I can't decide, I'll do a 2-2 split. But back to Piercing Twilight. I got a cough. I actually kind of do think this card will see some play, mostly because it's pretty effective at choking out a few of the combo decks in the game. The only issue being is that if people know that you are playing this, they're just not going to play their combo pieces, so that way you can't snap them out. Otherwise, I don't really think this is that great a card outside of just being a 4/4 guard. You banish something that's kind of useful to your opponent, or they're playing a combo and you blow out their combo. It's going to do one of those two things. The problem being that if you're trying to blow out their combo, I don't think you're really getting a winning strategy here. If you need a banish graveyard effect, it's far more likely you're going to play Memory Wraith. That said, no one plays Memory Wraith anymore. The only time I play Memory Wraith is as a one-of in a deck that has tutors. There's really nothing else I can think to use for it. If I'm running Lannis in a deck, sometimes I will run a single Memory Wraith. If you're going to run Piercing Twilight, it's more likely you're going to run it as a 3x. It's also worth noting that it helps you survive conscription, where if your opponent goes through a conscription, you can often play this to get rid of the rest of the conscriptions in their deck, so you don't have to deal with it anymore. And then on top of that, you have a 4/4 guard that'll probably eat 2 creatures from the conscription. Not exactly most efficient. You'd probably rather just Ice Storm everything away, but you gotta work with what you got. Overall, I don't think this is a great card, but it probably will see a little bit of play. I'll give it that much. Mostly as a method to beat out a few combo decks that aren't expecting you to run it. Alright, so I've spilt enough blood here. Let's go ahead and move on to the next card. Apex Wolf. Apex Wolf got a lot of talk. I know a lot of people really, really liked Apex Wolf. But a lot of people also think it's overcosted trash. I'm kind of more in the leaning that it's overcosted trash. It does do stuff. There are things that this card does that are worth noting. I think one of the more underrated features about it is that this is the Last Grasp. It's a draw effect. It does draw you that creature card and give it breakthrough and drain. Where this card is probably most useful is if one deck that used to see a decent bit of play that doesn't really see a lot of play anymore is Crusader Rage Crusader, or Rage Satyr. I think a lot of people call it Rage Satyr. One of the things lacking in Crusader, in that deck, the Rage Satyr, or in Crusader in general, is a lot of good life gain effects. Whereas in the Archer Rage decks, you could use the Werebat that was a 4-2, use Rage with that, and get a whole entire shitload of life. This you can kind of do the same thing while at the same time doing a little bit of damage. I think the thing to note is that this creature having Breakthrough and trying to use Rage with it probably isn't all that useful. On average, you're probably going to get about 3 damage worth of Rage out of it. It's just how Rage scales. If this was a 5/5, you'd probably be more likely to get about 5 or 6 points of damage out of it. You go up to 6, you're more likely to get about 8 or 10 damage out of it. But as a 4/4, say your opponent has 3 creatures in play, 2 with 2 toughness and 1 with 3 toughness, you're only getting 5 damage total out of the Breakthrough. I mean, you're gonna gain 12 off the drain, and that is way more useful. But so where would I play this card? Probably only in Rage Satyr, or if you're really psychotic, you can play it in Redoran Rage, which I never heard of. I'll go ahead and move on to the next card. Shadow Mark. This card got a lot of talk. This card, I think the most important thing that this card does is it brings back a deck that we haven't seen in a while in Market Archer. Market Archer is actually a surprisingly good deck that no one plays. The reason nobody plays it is because all the people that used to play it are now playing Namira Shrine decks. That dumb, I hate that deck. The Archer Namira Shrine deck in particular, that runs a whole bunch of crossbow and archer effects that just ping creatures when the creatures you're using to ping with all have lethal. And you can effectively 1-for-1 an opponent's entire board because you have Namira Shrine, so you're drawing 4 cards a turn. But kind of going back to this card, this card is kind of useful in that it's useful in that manner because you can give your opponent a lot of crap. So when your market strategy is not working, you can give them a bunch of crap and get yourself a bunch of actually useful cards. Effectively, this is a barter. Effectively, this is a barter, but you have to have actual trash in your deck. You can't afford to give your opponent a good card. Now, usually you should have mostly good cards in your deck, so outside of that Market Archer deck I was talking about, there's a bunch of decks that you can probably play this in. If you like drawing cards, you probably like this card. Anyway, I think that basically summarizes it. If you want to draw cards, you play this card. You just have to make sure that you're not giving your opponent something that's going to give them the win. So you want to make sure that your deck actually has cards that are useless in a lot of decks, which in Archer is actually true. It's something you can have a lot of. Next card. Oh, look, a wild Justin Larson appeared. This card got a lot of talk, and I kind of want to spend a good bit of time talking about it myself. So, Carspire Scout. At first glance, this card looks terrible. I'm not going to lie. This card looks really bad at first glance. Which is on par with pretty much every 1-drop in this game, is that they all look like garbage. But let's look at this at a little bit of a different angle. If you were to play this card, where would you play it? In my thinking, I can basically come up with 2 ways. One is Altar of Despair, mostly because I just play Altar of Despair with everything. One of the problems you find with Altar of Despair is the 1-drop slot. There are very few 1-drops that are very effective to get with Altar of Despair. The number 1 card if you're playing green, you take Ungulum. Ungulum is pretty much the best thing that you can take in an Altar of Despair deck. It's not even close. Number 2, in my opinion, is Word Wall, which means you're running a bunch of shouts in your deck. To be honest, it's not great, but I mean it works. It's a 1-drop that's going to do something that's going to help you. Now, that isn't nearly as effective as it used to be now that Drain Vitality has been nerfed, but it's still something you can do. 3 is Brutal Ashlander, which in my opinion is the weakest of the bunch, but you can get value. You actually can get value out of it. The problem with Brutal Ashlander is that you're almost always playing green in an altar deck, so Brutal Ashlander doesn't find a spot in a deck that has to run the Singleton Ungulum. But so moving back to this card, I think you can actually play this card in an altar deck. If you're playing Endurance, like Endurance Altar is not a thing. There aren't 1-drops to get in really in the colors. Like you have to understand, there's only 5 1-drops in Endurance, and the best card you could probably get is Deathless Draugr, which doesn't do anything. So, but this is a little more useful because you can get it, it dies, you draw a card, which pretty much all of the altar decks will play Thieves Guild Recruit, which this is effectively a Thieves Guild Recruit that instead of decreasing the cost, it ups the cost by 1. That's that. Now, where I think this card is probably even more useful is an aggro warrior, as in the aggro warrior list that pretty much everybody has a version of and is playing right now. So you're thinking, how is this card any bit useful in this deck? Well, because it costs 1. It costs 1, it can help fill the lane for Siege Catapult, and when it dies, it replaces itself with another card that you can use to continue to fill the lane for Siege Catapult. Effectively, this works as kind of an engine for Siege Catapult, which is, I guess, all you really want to do. I really can't come up with any other use for this card besides Siege Catapulting an altar. I think Siege Catapult is probably an actually legitimate use for this, and I think people should probably test it out, because I'm thinking that's probably a really good strategy. I don't have enough Siege Catapults to try it myself, but I think more people should, because it's probably going to work out pretty well for you. Alright, we'll go ahead and move on to the next card. Green Pack Ambusher. Easily best art in the set. Whoever drew this one, props to you. Easily best art in the set. So, now the obvious card we can compare this to is Greystone Ravager, the 4-1 Prophecy. Because what is this? A 4-1 Prophecy with Guard. That doesn't mean it's strictly better. Having a Guard does not make this strictly better. The second ability, that kind of does make it better. With that second ability, it effectively means that if you can't play it, this comes down and gets you 1 block. Why is that relevant? Well, again, let's kind of go back to Siege Catapult. When your opponent fools up on a lane, this comes down, and they're going to have to trade their Siege Catapult into it, unless their Siege Catapult's already taken damage. Because if their Siege Catapult has already taken damage and it goes into it, they lose Siege Catapult, which you don't want to do to a card that your opponent didn't pay any mana for, or Magicka for. You also can't really send your tiny creatures that you're using to fill the lane to attack with Siege Catapult unless you already have the Magicka for another creature, which you probably just played a creature, which is why this came down and ambushed you. So that's one way this is useful. It's also useful as 4, 5, and 6 Greystone Ravagers. You can easily just play this in Prophecy Battle Mage as more Greystone Ravagers. Your opponent's always going to look to trade into it, which is fine. Because, I mean, it's a 4-1. If it got 1 attack, it's a 4-1 for 2. If it got 1 hit in, it was probably useful. If it got 2 hits in, it was really good. So, I do expect this card to see play in aggro decks. It might even... the Token Crusader deck, I think, will probably play this as well. But if you're smashing face, you probably should be playing this card. Even though the effect is more defensive, the stat line on this tells you should be playing this card. Pretty simple. Next card. Okay, this one we gotta talk about. Thurval Extortionist. That's Khajiit. Khajiit. Um, I've gone back and forth on this card a lot. On one hand, you can play it in Rage. I don't think you should, but you can. Um, you play it in Rage and get a whole lot of Magicka to cast stuff. I don't know. Where this is more relevant is the fact that this is a 7/5 for 5. That's a lot of stats. That's some stats on this bad boy. Effectively, it trades out with majority of the creatures people are going to play in this game. The slay ability, I mean, I guess that's okay. I'm not quite sure what you're going to try to do with that outside of maybe play a really big creature. You're probably going to play this card more for stats than anything else. So in that case, decks that play it or decks that are going to want to play creatures that have big stats. Which is handy because it has a slay ability that allows you to play more creatures with big stats. I'm not going to say much else about this. It's not really my kind of card. Destruction Tutor, on the other hand, is a little more interesting. So remember how I said Market Archer? A lot of people have been promoting this to be the new card you play with Market. Here, I'll look up Market because I talked about it before, but I didn't say anything about it. Swindler's Market. And pow. So, Swindler's Market, when you play 0-cost spells, you drain your opponent for 1. The Market Archer list basically completely abused people with unsummon. You play your Nord Firebrand, you hit them, and then you unsummon your Nord Firebrand and replay your Nord Firebrand and hit them again. That's 5 damage off 2 cards. It works out pretty well when you just kind of chain those synergies together. It gets more uglier when you start buffing it with the 1/0 support or Clan Captain. So, kind of the Destruction Tutor. Destruction Tutor essentially makes a majority of it makes a whole bunch of actions that you play in those colors really, really good. I don't know what that deck's going to look like. I'm not quite sure what you want to play that's going to completely destroy your opponent. Maybe you play a bunch of Ice Spikes. I mean, if you look at the cards, you can. Yeah, let's look up action. Let's take this a little slow. We'll look up actions. Okay, just action, because actions is not what we want to look at. Bam. So actions under blue. Yeah, Balazar's Tinkering, which I don't think is really effective in this. Ice Spike, which probably is effective in this. Moment of Clarity, another one. Moment of Clarity is probably makes a little more sense because you can often just play Moment of Clarity and grab another cheap action off it. You're not going to play Wisdom of the Ancients. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything. I don't think I was, because I think I actually already had that up. Yeah. So that's what you have to work with. We'll go ahead and look at the 1-drops. 1-drop, you have Firebolt. 0, you do have Cruel Firebrand, which you might see. Actually, all of these you logically could see in the deck. Lesser Ward's actually just kind of a decent card if you're running the right stuff into it. Moving over to green, you're probably just going to play Curse if you're going to play that. Check the 1-drops. You can run a full set of Dream Vitalities and Swift Strikes. Or not Swift Strikes, Shadow Shifts. Yeah, Lockpick. You can do a Lockpick chain. That's probably one of the more effective things I can think of that you can do with Destructive Tutor, is to play a full set of lockpicks and just endlessly chain lockpicks. And by endlessly chain, I mean keep casting it until you actually draw a card in your deck. Yeah, that's really all I can think of to do. here. I think this is probably a card you're going to see a lot of people try to make work. Whether or not it actually works, well, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. I think it probably will be good, but probably just about as good as Market Archer is in general. Because I think Market Archer is a pretty decent list that just no one plays anymore. Alright, we'll go turn back. I think I've spilt enough blood here. Let's go ahead and go on to the next card. Harmony. I'm going to come out and say it. I think Harmony is the worst card they printed in this particular set. It's really only effective in Arena, in my opinion, where you can cast it and force out a bunch of trades onto their... some bad trades from their end. Make them make bad attacks. You get to make good attacks. It's also one of the few cards that's pretty much strictly better cast from your hand than from Prophecy. If you play it from Prophecy, you're probably not going to be saving that much damage. I would imagine it be... If you actually cast it from Prophecy, you're probably only saving about 6 damage at best. But if you cast it from your hand, you get to make out the trait. You get to make much more efficient attacks, and your opponent probably doesn't get to attack at all. Where this card might be helpful is in control decks, particularly Control Mage, which has a significant lacking of tools to deal with wide boards. This can kind of help with that. You essentially buy yourself a free turn while being able to whittle down a bunch of creatures. I'm not hype on this. It's here. But do what you will. Deathhound. Deathhound's another card I'm not overly high on, but to kind of explain why, I'll quickly go to the 5 slot in Endurance. And we can quickly run through some of the cards that you would kind of play that are in line with this. And I've played Whiterun Protector and Shadowfen Priest. I have not really ever run any of the others in a manner that's similar to how you would play Deathhound. Deathhound's advantage is that it's well statted. It is a 6/6, which Stampeding Mammoth is also a 6/6, but if you have one other creature with Breakthrough. Whiterun Protector is also a 6/6 if you transform it. It also has Regenerate. Shadowfen Priest has Silence or destroys a support. I feel like all these things are I'd probably mostly play something else at the 5 slot rather than a mid-rangey creature is kind of what I'm trying to get at here. Like, I'd probably rather play Shadowfen Priest and Hallowed Death Priest. I think those are probably more efficient uses at 5 Magicka than this. But let's kind of quickly talk about what this actually does. It's a 6/6 guard. You're going to lay it down turn 5 as a 6/6 guard. It gets hit and maybe loses some power here. I think I want to kind of quickly go over how I believe when this card is silenced works. I believe when this card is silenced, it goes back to having 6 power, no matter what, because that's what it says default on the card. It's also possible that it keeps the stat it had when it was silenced, but I honestly doubt that. I think it just goes back to being 6 power when this gets silenced. Meaning this probably isn't the best silenced target, which is something that I'm starting to realize because this game has so many silence effects. Cards that, when silenced, become better for you are pretty useful. There are a handful of them. Siege Catapult's a good example. When you silence it, it loses the requirement to have a full lane to attack. Pretty handy. So it's not a card that really gets more effective as you silence it, or it gets less effective when it's silenced by your opponent. This is kind of similar in that manner. But in the end, would I play this? Probably not. I think I'd probably be looking for, in a more controlling matchup, to play Hallowed Death Priest or kind of as a utility card, Shadowfen Priest. If I was really playing aggro, it's way more likely. Well, I used to play white. That's really hard to say. White Run Protector. I did used to play that mostly because it was fun, and at 6 power regenerate with guard, it became kind of a pain in the ass to remove. I don't think you're gonna see anything from this card. I'm not expecting much play at all. Alright, next card. Okay, this was Santos Vela's card. This card had me a Bruin. I was a Bruin when I saw this card. So two things about this card. This card in general, if you just kind of read it, is not very good. You can't really put it on. You can't put it on 2 toughness creatures because it kills the 2 toughness creature, and you do 2 damage to something else, and that's really all you got out of it. You essentially played a 2-mana fire build that kills your own creature. So you need to have creatures that have 3 power or 3 toughness or ward. So let's go back to thinking creatures that have 3 toughness that this is worth putting on, and creatures that are ward that this is worth putting on. Well, there's actually quite a few. Let's quickly go to endurance because you have to see these cards to kind of understand what we're doing with Sword of the Inferno. So the first card I kind of do want to highlight for this is Barrow Stalker. So if you put Sword of the Inferno on a Barrow Stalker, the Barrow Stalker takes 2 damage, which, because it has Drain, you gain 2 health off of. Hits another creature for 2, which, again, this still has Drain. You gain 2 more life. And now you have a 4/1 that has Drain. So you can hit for 4 and gain another 4 life. You gained 8 life on turn 3. That's pretty good. That's actually, like, really good. Now, what you can do with that 8 life, I mean, you live, but in terms of other utility you can have, if you're playing a Redoran deck and you have Undying Dragon and you turn 3 gained 8 life, ooh. Oh, and killed probably 2 creatures, because you probably traded your Barrow Stalker into a creature. If you didn't hit the face, which actually in hindsight, you probably hit the face, and they had to trade into it. And you killed off another creature. Like, these are all useful things that I would see useful for this card. Other uses? A lot of people talked about putting on Daggerfall Mage. That's pretty mad to me. Like, you can do that. That's cool. Yeah, that's cool. You can do it. Oh, it's 4-drop. Where this is really useful is Breton Conjurer. You can put it on a Breton Conjurer. Take out a creature. This loses ward, you get your 5/5. And this got 3 power to trade into something. Or you can give it ward again and then trade the ward into something and get another 5/5. That's where I think this card is probably going to see the most use. The mid-range Battle Mage deck, or that deck kind of just makes a living off rapid shotting its own Breton Conjurers. This gives you another tool. It might as well swap back. This gives you another tool for setting off Breton Conjurer, while still being able to murder off some other creature. So what did this card do? It fits pretty nicely into mid-Battle Mage, I think. I don't think it's a 3-of. I don't think a lot of decks will run this as a 3-of, but it's a solid 2-of. In a pinch, you can throw it on a Daggerfall Mage to get the draw, kill a creature, and then trade off with something a little bigger. Like, in all defense of when I said it's probably not great on a Daggerfall Mage, it gets you the Tome and allows you to kill a 6 toughness creature when you put on your Daggerfall Mage. That's fair. And so it makes that deck mid-Battle Mage pretty good. But you can also... So, Self-Damage Warrior was kind of a meme deck. Let's see if I can find the card that is kind of what everyone's talking about playing this with, because it's not a good card. But it's fully memeable. You can meme hard with it. I was pretty sure it was a 4-drop. I do not remember the name of it at all because I've never played it because it's just terrible. Maybe it was a 5-drop. Was it that bad? Was it a 5-drop? Oh my god, I don't know where this was because I know it wasn't a 3-drop. Okay, I'm gonna have to look this up. Damage. Oh, it was a 3-drop. Fierce Northlander. I thought it was a 4-drop. I thought it was really bad. But Fierce Northlander, you can put this on a Fierce Northlander, and the Fierce Northlander becomes a 6/5, and it takes out a creature, and has breakthrough. That's fair on turn 4. It's reasonable. That said, Fearless Northlander is a card I would never play in a constructed deck. I've played it in Arena. I've blown out people in Arena with it. But in a constructed deck, I don't think I've ever played it. But it kind of fits the deck. You can work with it. So again, going back to Sword of the Inferno, you can play it in your Mimi self-damage warrior list. You can play it in your battle mage list. I think it's good in both. I think this is a card that actually will probably see a decent bit of play and will be really frustrating when your opponent plays it. Alright, last card. This is the card that was just revealed today. Wild Incarnate. I'm going to go out on a limb. I think this card's trash. I think this card's not very good. I think there's so many other things I'd rather be doing at 7 in pretty much every other deck. Not to mention the fact that you have to have a whole bunch of runes. This card would be better if it had 2 power, so I could bring it back with Necromancer. It's just... This is not a very good card. Which makes sense because it's a neutral card. You don't want your neutral cards defining formats. But this... Draw 2 cards if you have 5 runes. Draw 1 card if you have 4 runes. It'd be better if it was your opponent has 4 runes or your opponent has 5 runes. Because decks that would play this keep their opponent at 4 or 5 runes. Either way, I still wouldn't play this. There are far more efficient ways to draw cards and have a guard than to put this card in your decks. This is probably the card you will see the least play of in the game. Which is unfortunate because it's the one legendary in the set. So overall thoughts on Frostfall? I really like the direction that they took with Frostfall. The biggest complaint about the game has been that the meta has not moved at all. These cards give me enough meme shit to do that I can make a decent living off of just trying to have fun with these new cards. So, that's what I would do. I would take it and run with it and play my memes. Most of the cards I don't think are great and are very situational, but I would 100% play them if I was trying to build for that situation. That's that.